Guys, welcome back to Oz and Elsewhere. My name is Rebecca, and today I'm making the kind of video that I'm hoping won't make me regret my comments section. So here's how it all started. At the beginning of this year, I decided that I wanted to try this challenge where I read books I kept seeing hyped online, part of it as a trial to see if I agreed with the hype, part of it honestly to not feel left out. And I decided to start with Emily Henry. And I read Beach Read. I went chronologically. I noticed something that stood out to me, so I wanted to see if it was in her other books. So I read People Meet on Vacation, then Book Lovers, then Happy Place, then you get the idea. And in every single book of Emily Henry's that I read, I noticed the same thing. And I think it's time to talk about it. We need to talk about Emily Henry and alcohol. So let me give a quick disclaimer because I'm on the internet and that's how I talk at this point. But also, I think it's important for the context of this video. Number one, I am not someone qualified to speak about alcohol or alcoholism. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not an addiction specialist. I am nothing like that. This is just based on my observations, my reading, and what I know based on personal individual research and also from talking to friends of mine that are in fact addiction specialists and psychologists. Number two, I am not making this video in any way to speculate on the Emily Henry the person. I have no interest in knowing, speculating, talking about her alcohol use, her relationship to alcohol. That is none of my business. That is none of anybody's business except for the authors. So from now on, in this video, when I say Emily Henry, I'm not referring to the person Emily Henry. I'm referring to the Emily Henry literary universe. So this group of interconnected books that are usually standalones but have some interaction that make it clear that they're set in the same kind of universe, not to borrow a Marvel term. Third disclaimer is that I'm not making this video because I'm a prude that gets offended by the mention of alcohol. I mean, I like drinking alcohol. I collect bottles of wine with my partner. I like having a nice cocktail. I like trying different beers. I went out in college. I'm just making this video because I noticed this trend and I wanted to talk about it. And as the video goes on, I hope I'll make it clearer why I'm talking about this at all. So I want to start off by talking about the different roles that alcohol plays in Emily Henry books and what that says about the contemporary universe she was writing in, but also about our own society outside of the pages of this novel. And through these individual books, I hope to kind of explain what I'm talking about. I guess the fourth disclaimer is I'm not going to mention Great Big Beautiful World because I wrote the script before it came out. I didn't have time to record it. Also, I live in Serbia. We don't exactly get the latest novels here, and if we do, they're kind of expensive. So I haven't read it yet. I'm not sure I will because I have mixed feelings about this whole project. So disclaimer's over. The first thing I want to say is alcohol as fun, which is really, the very obvious implication of alcohol. Most people, when you ask them why they drink, they'll say it is to be fun and to be sociable. And both in real life and in literature and pop culture, alcohol is often used as shorthand for letting go. It's a very common trope that you'll have this person, this character who is normally very tightly wound, normally very uptight, and then they start drinking and then they act very differently. So the reason why this trope is so popular is because it is based on reality. I'm going to cite this British sociologist, Kate Fox, who I found cited on this online blog, the sociologist that helped me kind of understand what she was saying, where she talked about how adults often need props to have fun, where, kids, they're able to have fun whatever they want, but with adults, it's a lot harder to get into that mental space of having fun. And alcohol is a very common prop that people use to make that step and make that switch. There are a few reasons. One is, alcohol physically is a conductor of fun because of the chemical processes that it triggers in the brain. If you're using it in the right frame of mind, using it in the right way. But it's also a social shorthand for fun because most settings where adults go to have fun do involve alcohol. most settings where it is acceptable for adults to have fun involved. Alcohol, having fun as an adult is most socially acceptable with alcohol, and also socializing with other adults is most socially acceptable as alcohol. And also, I mean, drinking can be fun. Being in settings where people are drinking can be fun. And this shows up in two Emily Henry books that I lovingly call her tight ass duology. You'll see what. So first I want to talk about Happy Place. So Happy Place follows Harriet and Wynne, who are this power couple from their college days, but they secretly broke up and didn't tell any of their friends, except now they're at their friend Sabrina's beach house with all their friend group from college, and they can't tell, they have to pretend that they're together, and of course, sparks fly. So Wynne is this lovable, honestly, book boyfriend who wound up having to move back to his rural hometown to take care of his parents, while Harriet is pursuing her neurosurgeon career, which she is not entirely sure that she cares about. So the way that I kind of tracked alcohol use in these books is very unscientific. I just highlighted every time people mentioned alcohol and then later tallied up, okay, and kind of divided them into discrete scenes and conversations. So Happy Place has 15 scenes where people either mention or consume alcohol. It has one scene that revolves around marijuana, which is a first for Emily Henry, if you're going chronologically. But it also has one character, Cleo, who is sober, and a conversation about what that choice means for her, what she thinks it means for her, the friend group, and the reasons why she did it, but also the struggles she faces in this place where she feels as if alcohol consumption is expected, which I think was really interesting and showed a certain evolution in the way that Emily Henry writes about alcohol. So in this book, clearly the facilitator is alcohol. Alcohol helps break down both Wynne and Harriet's barriers and inhibitions to make them both feel closer to each other, but also face some truths about their own life. And it also acts as a way for them to feel closer with their friends, reminisce about old times, and see if they can try and incorporate that feeling that they miss so much into their daily lives. So Happy Place, I mean, a lot of Emily Henry's books seem to occur on vacation for a reason, which is that to make these romances happen, sometimes the character needs to step out of their comfort zone, both physically and also mentally. And the trip is the first step, but then the alcohol is the second step to get out of their comfort zone. And this is kind of what happens for Harriet and Wynne. And I thought that was alcohol in this case is a very interesting device, but also it's expected and making a social reality. I mean, most people, when they go hang out with their friends at their beach house, do pack a cooler of beers. The second book that I think uses this kind of alcohol shorthand for fun in this way, and the second, or I guess the first book, because it came chronologically first, and the tight ass duology is Book Lovers. So Book Lovers follows Nora, who is a high-powered New York City publishing agent, as she goes to a small town in North Carolina with her little sister Libby, and there runs into her publishing quasi-nemesis, high-powered editor Charlie, who's actually from this small town. What's interesting is that both Nora from Book Lovers and Harriet from Happy Place repeatedly say that they're people that don't normally drink. Like, I don't normally drink, I don't normally go out, yet the books feature copious mentions of them drinking. So Book Lovers is kind of around the same as Happy Place. It also features 15 mentions of alcohol. And here again, alcohol is the facilitator. It's what gets this person who's really very tightly wound to kind of let go and have some fun. Especially, and here it's a second point because it's a character study of Nora. Nora is someone who has a very hard time letting go because she has been parentified into taking care of her little sister and with the trauma of her mother's death. And for her, alcohol, her resistance to alcohol is in her normal life is part of that tightly wound control. It's explicitly mentioned that she only drinks gin martinis, only one per sitting, and only drinks this because gin was what the flight attendant served her when she was coming back from scattering her mother's ashes. And she never drinks because she wants to always be ready in case something happens to Libby or another one of her loved ones. So then, even though she continues her gin martini habit, allowing herself to drink and get drunk more often is what makes it possible for her to realize that she can have fun and that she can let go of this need to constantly care for others, which is a necessary prerequisite to realize she can find love with Charlie. And again, this is a problem I have sometimes with the Emily Henry books. It's important context to note that I read all these in the span of like a 2-month period. They can get a little bit repetitive and they can repeat a lot of the same devices. So here alcohol as a facilitator gets used often, but here I thought it was very interestingly done in tandem with her character choices, what these women normally are like and what steps they need to take to grow as characters and to grow in their relationships. The second way I noticed Emily Henry uses alcohol is as a plot point. I mentioned this criticism earlier, is that when you read these books back to back, they can get a little formulaic, and one of those is how often alcohol is a plot point. However, I don't want to be too harsh on this thing because it makes sense to use alcohol as a plot point in a romance novel, especially in a contemporary romance novel, or any novel about contemporary US life, because according to some statistics, 50% of US adults over the age of 12 consume alcohol at least once a month. And since for some reason the study was done on adults over the age of 12, I assume if they raise that boundary to maybe 18, it's going to be a lot higher. Alcohol is a normal part of most adults' lives, and especially in romantic settings. So if it's a romance book, you need to have the characters meet, you need to have them go on dates, and most places where people meet other people or go on dates are bars or restaurants where they'll have a glass of wine, so it makes sense for there to be alcohol. Specifically in romance books, alcohol as a plot point serves another vehicle because these books often have setups that, if you thought about them in real life, are quite unlikely. But alcohol is there to make you not think about that too hard, to kind of facilitate the reader's suspension of disbelief. So an example of this is Funny Story. Would it occur to most people to pretend they're dating their ex-fiance's new fiance's ex to get back at them? Probably not. But to have Daphne make this decision while hungover makes it a lot more believable. Like, yes, it is likely that this person said something kind of stupid after drinking and then doesn't want to walk it back. So that's the setup for a Funny Story, which is Daphne and Miles, whose exes broke up with them to get together with each other, leaving them kind of stranded and accidental roommates because Daphne winds up losing her housing as well, since she was living with her fiance in a town that she had moved to for him. And the story follows them as they kind of start go from roommates to being in a fake relationship to make their exes jealous to developing a real relationship. It's a very sweet story. It's a very sweet story that involves a lot of drinking. So besides the initial setup, I counted and this story has 27 scenes mentioning alcohol and 3 scenes mentioning weed or marijuana. Just to add an important caveat, while this number is fairly high, I think it's relevant to say that Miles works at a winery. So since the very unscientific way I tallied this was to just highlight every time people mention alcohol or an alcoholic beverage, it makes sense that he's going to be mentioning it fairly often because it's related to his job. And there are several scenes that take place at his job. I also noticed a distinct evolution in the way that Emily Henry discusses alcohol and substance use, because this is the most recent book of hers that I read. So this is the first time I see, I guess it happens somewhat in Happy Place, but here it's made a lot more explicit, the relationships that the characters have with different substances. So there's several times where when Miles is at work, he'll check in, see if someone is good to drive or if they've had too much. Discussions about when bartenders need to cut people off because they've had too much. And when talking about marijuana specifically, Miles admits that he was smoking a lot as a maladaptive coping mechanism with getting broken up with. And I mean, I don't think, like, I don't require my romance novels to be PSAs, but I do think it's nice to see this kind of honest discussion about what alcohol and weed mean to these characters and what relationships they have with them and what it means to maybe have a healthier relationship with them, which was missing from a lot of the earlier books. I'll get into that later. The thing is, here we have weed actually playing the role that alcohol had in Happy Place and Book Lovers, which is the facilitator for a tightly wound woman allowing herself to let loose, where Daphne decides to smoke with Miles because the only reason she didn't smoke earlier was because Peter didn't like it, and she adjusted a lot of her personality to what she thought her ex-fiance wanted. It's just cool, but also shows that the writing does get a little formulaic. If you're relying on alcohol every time you need your character to break out of their comfort zone or have some fun, you just throw alcohol in there, and then to just change it up, you throw in weed. It's gonna stop working at a point, especially if you have readers reading your books back to back. And I do want a bit more creativity. So alcohol can be fun. I mean, alcohol is fun, and having alcohol in your book shows that your characters are having fun, right? Except alcohol can get a little bit too much fun. And again, I'm going to use statistics from the US here because those are easiest to find and because these books are set in the US. I mean, 3% of US adults are considered alcoholics. Actually, 3.5%. Even greater than that is the number of people considered to be excessive drinkers, is about 1/3 of US adults. These are people that maybe don't have physical dependencies on alcohol, but still use alcohol greater than advised. And the study that I'm going to link down below cited two types of excessive drinkers. Those are binge drinkers, those are people that drink more than 4 drinks a night, and heavy drinkers, those are people that drink more than 8 drinks a week. And what these numbers show is that having a difficult relationship with alcohol is a lot more common than the alcoholism statistics make it sound. Where, okay, maybe these are people that aren't experiencing chemical dependencies yet or are able to hold down relationships and hold down jobs. They're not having their addiction interfere in their life, but are still seeing physical, social, and emotional consequences from their relationship with alcohol. And this is something that a friend of mine would describe as alcohol is maybe too important to them. Or, if you have a person who is a little bit too excited to every time there's an open bar, or is everyone else is just having a sip, a little one drink with dinner, they're getting really plastered, or they're kind of eager to have drinks even in situations where it's maybe not, where not everyone else is drinking, where it's maybe not even super socially acceptable to have drinking. And these can have real consequences for people's lives. And the problem, this is both, there's studies been done on this. This is also anecdotal evidence that I've found. One of the problems with alcohol being legal and both socially acceptable is that it gets a lot harder to identify these unhealthy patterns, especially when you're young, because then it goes, okay, you spend a good part of your youth, at least in the typical American college trajectory, in a place where binge drinking is kind of encouraged. And then you graduate and you continue doing the same thing you did when you were 19, but why is it now less acceptable when you're 25? Slight digression here. What I mean is that this is a very real problem that a lot of American adults face, which is that it's hard to gauge what a healthy, or I don't want to say acceptable because it doesn't matter what other people think, but what the right relationship to alcohol for you is when there's not as much knowledge around these patterns besides, okay, if you're getting wasted every day and not able to hold out a job because of that, it's probably a bad thing. And that means a lot of people have unhealthy relationships with alcohol. And also because there's so much social pressure to drink. And in most places in the US, the only places where it is acceptable for adults to have fun, to spend time with their friends, revolve around alcohol. Why am I mentioning all of this? Because obviously what happens in society, we live in a society, is affecting the books we read and what the content we put in the books we read. And when these books are over and over again saying alcohol equals fun, it creates an unrealistic image of what fun looks like and what it means to fall in love and what you need to do to be ready to fall in love. Also, it gets kind of repetitive. I mean, why is alcohol the signifier of fun? Why is alcohol the only signifier of fun? There have to be other ways for people to have fun, right? I mean, right? There. Please tell me this isn't all there is now that I'm 27. And specifically in romance novels, I mean, especially if you're reading a bunch of romance novels, it does get repetitive. And this is why People We Meet on Vacation is my least favorite Emily Henry book. So People We Meet on Vacation follows travel writer Poppy. See, I can't even remember these characters' names. That's how little I liked it. And teacher Alex, who are friends since college. And they've been friends and they have this tradition of taking an annual trip together. It's kind of fallen apart because something weird had happened, and Poppy is hoping that one last trip to Palm Springs to Alex's brother's wedding that she kind of invited herself along to is going to fix everything. This book has 31 scenes that revolve around alcohol. 31. It's like average length book. 31 scenes that revolve around alcohol. Both in the present day timeline, there's a lot of flashbacks to the trips that Poppy and Alex took together, which is a structure I don't think worked, but that's a story for another day. And in every single one of those trips, Poppy and Alex go out drinking together. Their first trip, and they're 19. They go to Canada, where conveniently the drinking age is 19. Okay, reasonable thing to expect for teenagers, I guess, that they're not going to want to do that. But it continues every single trip. They wind up in a bar. They wind up getting drunk. They wind up at a house party. And even when you think, okay, these people are finally doing something other than drinking, they're going hiking. They pull out a bottle of wine on the hike and they finish a bottle of wine between the two of them on the hike. Which, I don't know, I mean, maybe this is just me, but being drunk in the woods sounds like my personal nightmare. And just not good safety protocol, unless it was a hike where the parking lot is still visible, whatever. And to me, this shows a distinct lack of imagination on the part of the author, which is that, okay, how do I show that these people are traveling and having new experiences and bonding? Let's put them in a bar. And the result is that it makes the characters feel like they have lack of imagination, like they're not compelling. Poppy is supposed to be this travel writer who is obsessed with travel because it makes her feel connected to people and especially get that connection that she craved because she was bullied as a child. But she only seems to be able to find that connection at the bottom of a bottle. And that makes her feel like someone that has a lack of imagination. It makes her feel less compelling when we're supposed to read through the book, follow her journey, root for her and Alex, even as they're being kind of jerks to the people they're in relationships with before they get in a relationship with each other. And even as they say stuff like Poppy at one point says she's a 3-shower-a-week person, which may have been my deal breaker with the book. So when you use this plot device too often, not only does it get too repetitive, but it also raises questions about your character's choices and why they're doing the things they're doing, if the things that the narrative says that they're doing is accurate, or if you're just participating in someone's self-delusion. But I don't think this is an Emily Henry problem. I think this is a US society is too focused on alcohol as the only way for adults to have fun problem. And because it is socially acceptable, it makes it so easy to have a problem that slips not just under the radar of everyone else, but under your own notice. The last critique I have of the role that alcohol plays in Emily Henry books is that it sometimes impedes the romance itself, which is supposed to be the point. So there are two reasons why I personally read romance novels, and I think these are the reasons why other people read romance novels. You read them for the romance development and the character development. The point is that characters grow over time and they develop. And also the character knowledge, because you have to get to know the characters and they have to get to know themselves to enter into the romance. And the way alcohol is used as a plot device often impedes this. And it's better if I illustrate this through an example, and that's beach read. So Beach Read is the first Emily Henry book that I read. And I don't have a tally of how often alcohol gets mentioned because while I was reading this, I wasn't thinking about this video because I hadn't noticed it yet. It was only halfway through this book. I go, oh wow, this is a lot. So Beach Read follows January and Gus, who are college rivals that lost touch, that wind up next to each other vacationing on Lake Michigan. Midwesterners, don't hate me if I got the name of the lake wrong. And at the same time, January is dealing with grief for her father, also grieving the idea of him because she found out at his funeral that he was having an affair. So obviously it's a lot. And January turns to drinking as a coping mechanism, which is maybe not healthy, but frequent, expected. People don't always grieve in healthy ways. The problem is that the narrative doesn't treat this as an unhealthy choice. It treats this as window dressing or a quirky character flaw. And that then makes the book feel dishonest. Second, because there becomes a tonal dissonance. There are several instances where January attempts to drive while drunk and is either stopped by other people, or there's one instance where her and Gus go on a date, get so drunk, both get really drunk even though they drove there, then are like, okay, we need to sober up before we drive home, have a coffee, which is proven not to make you sober enough to drive, and then drive home. And again, I don't want my romance novels to be PSA, but there's tonal dissonance where here are several situations where the characters either wanted to endanger other people because the choices they made while drunk, or actively endangered other people because the choices they made while drunk. And the narrative treats this as a hee hee ha ha moment where I'm sitting there going, these people are menaces. And this is unhealthy, and this needs to be addressed, and waiting for it to be addressed, and it is not. The second thing is that it impedes the character growth because a lot of the book is about January coming to terms with her broken visions of her family and her father and grieving him and developing healthier mechanisms for grieving. But the fact that she was using alcohol as a maladaptive coping mechanism is never addressed. Never. And that makes the character growth feel incomplete, and that makes the arc feel incomplete, and also makes the romance feel incomplete because it's saying, okay, she has unfinished business and he has unfinished business, so what's going on? And the third thing is it makes the character relationships feel hollow because you spend the whole book, or I spent the whole book, kind of waiting for someone in January's life to address this with her. Now, Gus at this point doesn't know her very well, so it would be weird for him to do it, but nobody addresses this. But at some point, it should be him, and he doesn't. And I mean, there's like when her best friend comes to visit after things with her and Gus do their third act breakup, the friend brings over massive amounts of alcohol and at no point goes, okay, let's have a drink, but then let's maybe adjust this. Although the friend does, force her to eat, force her to clean. There are some side characters that comment on her drinking. For example, the book club leaders that don't let her drive home while drinking. And then the next time they interact, they hand her a giant cocktail famed for its potency. And it just feels as if there is no character knowledge, there's no character development. Where because alcohol is being used as a plot device without thought to the implications of using alcohol as a plot device so often and what this means for the characters, it makes the romance feel flat because it feels as if nobody knows each other, if nobody really knows what's going on here, when romance, to be loved, is to be known. And that's the promise of romance. And here, January is not known because people are letting her be destructive without knowing it. And it also makes for a frustrating and boring read sometimes because then you keep expecting someone else to address this, to be the adult in the room, and it doesn't happen. And I can see some juvenilia or a certain immaturity in the way this is written. I see some of these themes get developed way better in later Emily Henry books, but when I read it, I found it really, really, really jarring. So why did I just spend 30 minutes, I think, speaking about Emily Henry, if possibly longer? It's not because, again with the disclaimers, it's not because I'm a prude that hates alcohol. It's not because I think romance novels need to have perfect characters and a perfect moral. And it's not because I think Emily Henry's books are bad. I actually quite enjoyed them. are three reasons why. The first is that I think contemporary fiction, specifically contemporary romance novels, are an interesting prism through which to look at contemporary US society and US dating culture. And based on Emily Henry's books, I think it is clear that modern US culture and modern US dating, at least the dating sphere that is portrayed in these books, does have a problem with alcohol and the normalization of alcohol consumption. That in real life makes it difficult for people to recognize when they maybe have an unhealthy relationship with drinking, in the same way that a lot of these characters don't seem to realize that they have an unhealthy relationship with drinking. Or more importantly, the narrative doesn't realize that they have an unhealthy relationship with drinking. Second of all, I think that there are frequent pleas to treat romances seriously, and part of treating romances seriously is to critique it on its own terms, but to critique it nonetheless. And if I'm going to critique the latest literary darling for the way it portrays women, as a very hypothetical example of a common criticism, this is a hypothetical example, not on purpose made vague, because that is how people often speak about literary fiction, as if it's just divorced men writing weirdly about women. But if I'm going to do that critique, I'm also going to critique romance novels, because if the genre is going to be taken seriously, it's also going to be critiqued seriously. And finally, I think, as I said, I think it's worth reckoning with alcohol narratives that we have both in real life and in fiction, just to see what it says about our own relationship with the substance. I guess the last question is, I like being difficult on YouTube, and I like taking things that are normally seen as fun and getting way too serious with it. So that's kind of my explanation for myself. Even if you don't necessarily agree with me, and you don't have to, I hope that this made you think about Emily Henry a bit differently. I do recommend reading her books. My personal favorite is Happy Place, followed by Book Lovers, followed by Funny Story. I think I'm going to like Great Big Beautiful World if I ever get around to reading it. And also recommend checking out a few other contemporary romance novelists. My recommendation is for Talia Hibbert, because Emily Henry is not the be-all, end-all. And of course, I recommend subscribing to my channel and sticking around for new videos that are going to be just as ridiculous, I think. Or maybe a little bit less so. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to Oz and Elsewhere, and let me know what you think in the comments. Bye!